I realized my marriage was over the moment I caught myself rehearsing what I was allowed to feel. Not what I want to say, what I was permitted to feel without starting another calm, exhausting conversation about why my reaction was the real problem. That realization came long before I found out about the cheating. At the time, I didn't know that's what it was called. I just knew I felt smaller in my own life. We'd been married for 9 years. No one would have described us as dramatic, stable, logical, good communicators. That phrase followed us everywhere, like a badge of honor. I didn't understand then that good communication can still be one-sided when only one person decides what's reasonable. The first signs weren't obvious. There were no secretive phone habits or sudden late nights. Instead, she became instructive. If I was upset, she explained why it didn't make sense. If I was quiet, she told me I was suppressing resentment. If I questioned something, she framed it as insecurity. Always calm, always composed. She spoke like she'd already processed everything, while I was still trying to catch up emotionally. I started deferring to her version of events because it sounded cleaner, more mature. Over time, I stopped trusting my own reactions. Whenever something felt off, I'd ask myself how she would explain it, and then I'd accept that explanation before even asking her. The discovery itself was almost boring. That's what scares me now. I wasn't snooping or suspicious. I was paying bills when I noticed a transaction on our joint account I didn't recognize. Small amounts, regular intervals, always the same vendor. When I asked her about it, she didn't hesitate. Said it was a co-worker she occasionally covered expenses for and got reimbursed later. The explanation came too fast, too smooth. That night, curiosity lingered. I searched the vendor. It wasn't an office-related service. It was a short-term rental platform. My chest tightened, but I still tried to explain it away. I wanted her answer to be true more than I wanted the truth. When I confronted her again, she sighed, not in guilt, but in disappointment. She asked why I didn't trust her. I showed her the receipts. She didn't deny them. She reframed them, said the stays were emotionally necessary, that the man she'd been seeing understood her in ways I never had. She said she didn't tell me because she knew I'd make it about betrayal instead of connection. I remember feeling dizzy. Somehow, her affair was being presented as evidence of her emotional depth and my hurt as proof of my limitations. She didn't apologize. She explained, over and over, until I started wondering if I was the one being unfair. The emotional fallout didn't come all at once. At first, there was shock, then anger, but mostly there was confusion. She stayed calm while I unraveled. Every tear I shed seemed to reinforce a belief that she'd been right to hide things. She told me we could work through this if I didn't fixate on labels like cheating. That word, she said, was too simplistic. I noticed how often she used language to blur responsibility, process, growth, evolution. Meanwhile, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The betrayal hurt, but what hurt more was realizing she'd already decided how this story would be told. And I wasn't the main character. The next few days felt scripted. She oscillated between warmth and distance, depending on how cooperative I seemed. When I asked direct questions, how long it had been going on, whether it was still happening, she accused me of interrogating her. She said healing required trust, not constant revisiting. Any attempt to clarify details was framed as my inability to move forward. I started noticing how often she redirected the conversation back to my reactions. If I was upset, she said I was dysregulated. If I went quiet, she said I was withdrawing. There was never space for my feelings to simply exist without being analyzed, corrected, or used as leverage. The first real twist came when I learned she'd already talked to people about us. Friends, her sister, a co-worker. Not about cheating, about how emotionally distant I'd been for years. How she'd tried everything. How lonely she felt. I recognized a version of myself she described only vaguely. It was like listening to someone summarize a character they'd watched from afar. When I pushed back, she said I was invalidating her experience. That word again, invalidating. I realized a narrative had been circulating long Before I knew there was a story to tell. I wasn't just catching up emotionally. I was catching up socially. I asked her if she was willing to end it completely. She said yes, but with conditions. No monitoring. No timelines. No punishment. Forgiveness was supposed to be immediate and unconditional, or else I was choosing resentment. She suggested therapy, but only if we focus on rebuilding trust, not examining what broke it. When I said that didn't feel fair, she said fairness was a childish concept in adult relationships. That's when it hit me. Accountability was something she expected from me, but never for herself. The rules only applied in one direction. Another twist came quietly. I found a message on her phone weeks later, not hidden, just archived. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It said, "I'm managing things on my end. I'll reach out when it's safe." Safe, not honest, not resolved. Safe. That single word told me more than all her explanations combined. I realized I wasn't competing with another man. I was competing with a system she'd built to keep her comfortable. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a variable she needed control. So nothing disrupted her sense of order. That's when I stopped engaging. I answered politely, briefly. I stopped defending myself. The change was immediate. Her calm cracked. She accused me of stonewalling, of emotionally abandoning her, of being cruel. The same behavior she'd praised as mature before were suddenly labeled abusive when they didn't serve her. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but clarity. I wasn't failing to communicate. I was finally refusing to participate in a conversation where the outcome had already been decided. And for the first time since discovering the affair, I started thinking about what leaving might actually look like. Leaving didn't happen in a single moment. It started as a quiet withdrawal. I stayed late at work. I stopped checking in. I slept closer to the edge of the bed. She noticed immediately. Asked if I was okay in that careful tone that sounded concerned but felt diagnostic. When I said I needed space, she said space was avoidance. That healthy couples didn't disengage. She reminded me of all the time she'd stayed and worked through discomfort. What she didn't mention was that staying had always meant adjusting myself to fit her version of reality. I realized that distance was the only way I could hear my own thoughts again. The messages kept coming after I left. Long ones, calm ones, explaining how disappointed she was that I'd chosen escape over growth. She said I was throwing away something rare, that I'd regret walking away from a woman who was willing to do the emotional work. There was still no apology, just interpretation. I stopped responding. That silence did something conversations never had. Friends I trusted finally heard the full story. Some were shocked. Others said pieces made sense now. One friend told me, gently, that it sounded like I'd been negotiating my existence for years. That sentence stayed with me. Therapy helped, but not in the way I expected. I wasn't there to fix my marriage. I was there to understand why I doubted myself so easily, why I'd accepted being constantly explained to. My therapist pointed out how often I described myself using her language, reactive, rigid, insecure. None of those words had originated with me. Realizing that was both painful and freeing. I wasn't broken. I'd been worn down. Slowly, systematically. Grief came in waves, not just for the relationship, but for the version of myself that believed clarity was something I had to earn. When we finally talked about separation, it was brief. She said she hoped I'd one day understand what she'd been trying to teach me. I said I wasn't interested in a relationship that required constant instruction. That truth shouldn't feel negotiable. That accountability shouldn't depend on my tone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. That seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. For the first time, I wasn't asking for validation. I was stating a boundary. It felt unfamiliar, solid, like standing on ground that didn't shift under my feet. If you're reading this and something in your relationship feels mentally exhausting instead of emotionally safe, pay attention. If every concern becomes a lesson about why you're wrong to feel it, pause. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It wasn't empowering in a cinematic way. It was quiet, terrifying, necessary. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I started trusting myself again. And if you're wondering whether you're overreacting, ask yourself this. Does clarity feel like freedom, or does it feel like a threat to the relationship you're in?